Hi, Ohms here, and welcome to OmzLaw. If you're new to this series, make sure to check out the previous video before watching this one. The link's in the description. We're gonna just dive right into it since this film is 3 hours and a half long and we've just covered the first act only. And we were discussing why The Fellowship of the Ring is the best film out of the trilogy. The last time we left Frodo and company while critiquing the plot, they had just escaped being captured by the ringwraiths. So they get to Bree, Frodo sasses at the doorman, Peter Jackson has a cameo, and they arrive to the prancing pony. The first half of the second act slows down the tempo slightly here, however we have just started the rising action. Frodo discovers that Gandalf isn't there, they sit down for a beer, and Sam points out that someone is watching them. They inquire from the innkeeper who tells them that he's a ranger that goes by the name of Strider. Frodo makes love to the ring. Seriously, why are you even touching this thing? Just keep it in your pocket. And Pippin manages to blow their cover. Instead of sending Sam or Merry after him, Frodo heads there himself and performs the most dramatic slip in film history. Seriously, who catches an object like that? That must be the hardest and most inconvenient way of catching something. And he disappears. You know, if I was on a secret mission whereby one of the most important instructions was to never put on the ring, as that will reveal my presence or get me killed, or worse, turn me into something completely insane, I'd make sure never to put it on. Especially in public. Frodo must be taking theater lessons from Bilbo. I mean, what's the worst that could have happened? The ring could have just hit the floor or his face. You could have simply let it fall. Let's move forward. The ringwraiths sense that the ring is near, the Strider's shocked, and so is basically everyone else, and Frodo encounters my worst nightmare since 2001. The Eye is a film edition. I know we said we weren't going to talk about the books, but I wanted to call attention to this plot device. Here our protagonist encounters the antagonist of the Fellowship of the Ring for the first time, which kind of gets you thinking why Bilbo never saw this thing. This is the thing. In the books, when Gandalf leaves to Minas Tirith to read a book and come back to confirm that it's the Ring of Power, almost 17 years has passed. This is why Bilbo looks as old as he is by the time Frodo encounters him in Rivendell. I wonder why Frodo, Sam, and the others didn't age like him. Must be a certain face cream. Anyways, I appreciate the film's attempt here to depict Sauron in a physical or visual form, as that is not present in the books. In film, if the conflict is not driven by natural events or inner struggles, then there must be an antagonist that somewhat appears or manifests physically. Sauron barks threatening lines about darkness, and Frodo snaps out of his stupidity and takes off the ring. Strider scolds him for calling too much attention to himself, as he should, and takes him upstairs. I've always wondered how this random character knows so much about Frodo and the ring he carries, and the fact that they're there to meet Gandalf. Let's not forget that Gandalf didn't even think it was the Ring of Power until he read about it, and it isn't really explained how he knows everything he does. He might have met up with Gandalf, but that is never really stated. Anyway, Sam comes in for the rescue, the Strider agrees to help them, the ringwraiths come into town, and we have our first classic Peter Jackson fake-out death. And he likes doing those a lot, believe me. Albeit, this is the one that I like the most. The Strider tells us some backstory about the ringwraiths, saying that they were the 9 kings of men, basically these dudes from the intro. Despite doubting him, they agree to follow the ranger to Rivendell. This part of the second act slows down a bit, with some comic relief moments about second breakfast, a lot of walking, some singing by the ranger that foreshadows his relationship with another character. Yeah, not a lot is happening here, but the scale of this world is being heavily established. And we cut back to our B story with Saruman, clearly in need of a pedicure. He uses the Palantir, which is basically like this walkie-talkie thing of Middle-earth, to contact Sauron. He receives instructions to build him an army worthy of Mordor, which honestly is a pretty low standard to live up to. He gets to work, Gandalf wakes up on the roof and watches all this happen. Back to the main plot, Strider and the gang get to a rundown watchtower and decide to rest for the night. The ranger conveniently leaves to look around so that the plot can happen, leaving room for the hobbits to light up a fire and do what they do best: call attention to themselves. The ringwraiths arrive, we're thrown once more into the rising action. Howard Shore kills it with the music. Seriously, this scene is a great example of building tension. Even though the ringwraiths suddenly forget how to use their swords and just shove the hobbits aside. Why didn't you just chop off their heads or something? Frodo trips again. The amount of times this guy trips in the series warrants a category in the Academy Awards. And then Frodo decides that the best thing to do at that moment is to reveal the weapon of the enemy to the enemy. Well done, Frodo. And he puts it on! Did he forget what happened at the Prancing Pony? I mean, sure, you'll get to disappear and perhaps evade being killed, but the ranger explicitly told you that they're drawn to its power. Why would you... Alright, let me just move on. The ranger comes in for the rescue, kicking some ass and burning some wraiths. Frodo comes to his senses, and thus begins our long journey of just seeing Frodo depressed. Prepare yourselves, there's 9 hours of this stuff left. They rush out of there to get Frodo some elvish medicine, and we cut back to the B story and some epic miniatures. Seriously, great job everyone at Weta. Even in 2020, your work still holds up to this day. The Isengard plotline helps us indicate the passage of time. By cutting back and forth to it, we can tell that a lot of time has passed since we left the Prancing Pony. For now, the landscape around the tower has been completely transformed. Gandalf talks to a moth, Peter Jackson does an amazing shot, and the ground gives birth to these things, known as Uruk-hai. Saruman acts like an asshole, and we cut back to the main storyline. You must have noticed by now that the beginning of the first half of the second act is done by cutting back and forth between these two storylines. A classic technique of parallel editing and storytelling. Anyways, they try to slow down the poison and Arwen arrives to the rescue. I think what I like most about this film is this interplay between light and dark. Every time we lose hope, we're reminded of it again. Some romance foreshadowing, Arwen gallops away and she's chased by the ringwraiths for a while until she finally arrives to the river. She summons these river horses and the rising action finally dies off with Frodo passing out and the audience being introduced to some early 2000s masking skills. Seriously, how did this make it into the final cut of the film? It feels like a different movie altogether. How did it even make it into the extended editions? Frodo wakes up groggy, initiating the second half of the first half of the second act. That was a mouthful. But essentially, this is where we are at this point. He inquires about Gandalf's absence at the Prancing Pony. Gandalf explains Saruman's betrayal and how he escaped. And we're just gonna pause here right now as we're approaching the Council of Elrond and deal with this issue once and for all. No, they can't use the eagles to take the ring to Mordor, for several reasons. 1. Remember that not everyone can hold on to this thing. Gandalf doesn't even dare to touch it. And the eagles are actually mystical creatures in the Fellowship. Gandalf is as well. We won't go into the lore in this video as I do believe this should have been presented to us in the film instead of being information that only Tolkien or book fans would know. But basically, if they do get near it, they could be susceptible to its power. Furthermore, in Return of the King, it is clearly established that the Nazgul are guarding the skies, so risking open confrontation with the enemy isn't going to work. The secrecy of the quest had to be maintained, although we know Frodo isn't really doing a great job at it. So we're not gonna waste any more time on this. If you ask me, Tolkien wrote himself into a plot hole. Peter Jackson could have taken it out, but instead we're just gonna have to go with this long-winded explanation that's not present in the films and is only accessible if you search it online or read the books. I mean, you'd think this would be a talking point in the council meeting, especially when Sean Bean says that one does not simply walk into Mordor. Anyways, Agent Smith finally shows up, Frodo walks around this epic miniature, we have a small reunion, and Frodo reunites with Bilbo, who again surprisingly looks very old, in spite of him losing the ring and stating that age has caught up with him. Here's an area as well whereby the film could have filled in some missing information, but let's keep going. Frodo has some second thoughts, then doesn't, and Sam convinces him to go back home. Gandalf and Smith discuss Frodo's resilience to the ring, and Smith adds that the ring cannot stay in Rivendell. Sean Bean arrives on cue along with the other main races of Middle-earth. Quite a theatrical entrance if you ask me. Smith states that his people are leaving and that basically it's none of his business anymore and that men are all weak. Jeez, you must be fun at parties. We jump into a flashback whereby Smith explains how Isildur failed to throw the ring into Mount Doom, but why didn't Smith just push him there instead? It's not like anyone could have seen it. He could have just said he tripped. Oh well, now he can just throw it on Gandalf and the clan 3,000 years later. He continues to basically rant about the race of men, with Gandalf pointing out that one man can unite them. We conveniently cut to Strider, matching the previous conversation with a shot of him, clearly telling us that he might be able to lead the race of men. And conveniently, he runs into Sean Bean, who's basically the son of the steward of Gondor. Basically the ruler of Gondor. Sean Bean admires the blade that cut the ring, he cuts his finger, there's some forced tension between him and the ranger, and so he drops the sword as he's leaving. Arwen pops in for a cameo and basically just throws in some backstory about this ranger being Isildur's heir, with the Strider showing us some great-great-great-great-great-granddaddy issues. Seriously, why does it matter that his blood is in his veins? It happened 3,000 years ago. A lot of people must have the same blood as well by now. Strider here just sounds like an idiot. And what the hell happened to this chick? One minute she's like epic Robin Hood she-elf, and the other she's princess please love me damsel in distress. Anyways, we spend some time on a bridge and Arwen gives Strider her necklace, dedicating her immortal life to him. We're then thrown back to the main conflict of the film with the Council of Elrond. Smith sasses at them, stating that each race is bound to his fate, except his since he's piecing out of there. Frodo brings forth the ring, everyone is in awe, and obviously the first person to succumb to it is the man in the room. Gandalf scares the shit out of everyone, and Sean Bean steals the show by telling everyone that they should use the weapon against the enemy. Strider steps in with his 2 cents, and Sean Bean asks about his credibility. And so we finally find out explicitly that Strider is actually Aragorn, heir to the throne of Gondor. Sean Bean gets pissed and says Gondor needs no king, and Agent Smith says that the ring needs to be destroyed. A dwarf heads for the kill, but Smith explains that the ring cannot be destroyed by a weapon that they have, and that it must be taken into the fires of Mount Doom. Wait a second, are those blankets? What the hell is this reflection supposed to be? No one bothered to touch this up for the extended edition? Anyways, Sean Bean says his famous lines of "one does not simply walk into Mordor." Everyone gets into a forced argument and Frodo takes it upon himself to take the ring there himself. A few volunteer to tag along and we finally have the formation of the Fellowship. Everyone preps for the journey, with Aragorn saying goodbye to his mother. Elrond shows up and says that he can reforge the sword, tries to convince Aragorn to reclaim his title, which is kind of strange since Arwen needs to convince him of this later on in the 3rd film. Frodo receives some mithril from Bilbo, and as he's putting it on, Bilbo spots the ring and wants to touch it. He loses his mind, apologizes for throwing this burden on Frodo, and the Fellowship sets off. They walk and walk. Peter Jackson has a cool shot, and we spend some time with the gang, with Gimli foreshadowing the road through Moria. Gandalf refuses to take it, and we arrive to the end of the second half of the first half of the second act. Essentially the midway of Act 2, with Saruman sending flocks of spies to reveal the location of the Fellowship. A reversal happens here, which forces the Fellowship to change direction and begin the rising action of the second half of the second act. And that's all I have for today. I'll see you guys next week. Don't forget to check out all of the other playlists and content on this channel. And as always, thank you for watching.